Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Since we often celebrate great national events in this House, would the Prime Minister join me in wishing Sir David Attenborough a very happy 90th birthday and thank him for all the way that he's presented nature programmes on television and awakened the ideas of so many people to the fragility of our ecosystem and educated a whole generation. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are fully aware... I haven't asked the question yet, it's okay. We are fully aware that the European Union has strengthened workers' rights in many ways. In March, while the Prime Minister was trying to undermine workers' rights with his trade union bill, the European Commission put forward proposals to close loopholes in the Posting of Workers Directive, which would stop employers exploiting foreign workers and undercutting national rates of pay. Will the Prime Minister confirm that his government will protect workers and will back these reforms to stop this undercutting and grotesque exploitation of many workers across this continent?
First of all, I certainly join the Right Honourable Gentleman wishing a very happy birthday to David Attenborough. I think many of us in this House feel that we grew up with him as our teacher about the natural world and about the environment, and he is a remarkable man. I'm proud to say that the Royal Survey ship, the Arctic ship, is going to be named after David Attenborough. There was strong support for Boaty McBoatface, but I think the life raft on the boat is going to be, the submarine on the boat is going to be named Boaty McBoatface, but quite rightly, Attenborough will take top billing. On the Posted Workers Directive, we are looking at this closely, working with our partners. We do see some merit in what's being proposed. I can tell him today that the yellow card procedure has been invoked by national parliaments over this, demonstrating the importance of these sorts of safeguards, even more of which, of course, we achieved in my renegotiation. But the best thing we can do for workers' rights in this country is celebrate the national living wage introduced by a Tory government.
Mr. Speaker, the national minimum wage was a Labour introduction. The national living wage proposed by his friend the Chancellor is frankly a corruption of the very idea of it. It is not, in reality, a proper living wage. But, Mr. Speaker, my question was about the Posting of Workers Directive, which would prevent the grotesque exploitation by unscrupulous employers of workers being moved from one nation to another in order to undercut the wages of the second nation. Will the Prime Minister be absolutely clear? Will the British government support this very, very important reform to stop this exploitation?
As I've said, we're working with the Dutch presidency. We think there's merit in a lot of the proposals, but we want to make sure we get the details right. But let me pull him up on something. He's just described the national living wage as a corruption. The national living wage, £7.20 an hour, a £20 a week pay rise to some of the poorest people in our country. I really think before this, he ought to get up and say he supports the national living wage and thanks the government for introducing it.
Mr. Speaker, I support a wage rise, obviously. The point I'm making is that it is not a living wage. It is not a living wage as is generally understood. Mr. Speaker, saying yes seems to be one of the hardest words for the Prime Minister. For a third time, could he just say whether he does or does not support the Posting of Workers Directive? He might be aware that Patrick Minford, a former economic advisor to Margaret Thatcher, has said that the European Union has a negative effect on the City of London, and he would want the shackles of European regulation removed. Does the Prime Minister believe that membership hurts the City of London, or does he believe that European Union regulation of the finance sector in Britain and British-administered tax havens would help the sort of bad practice exposed by the Panama Papers or underlined by my friend in his earlier question today?
Well, this is an area where we basically agree with each other about the European Union, so I'll try and identify a question in that lot and answer it as positively as I can. First of all, on Patrick Minford, I completely disagree with the economist Patrick Minford. He wants to see manufacturing industry in our country obliterated, and I think would be a disastrous step if we followed the advice that he gives. In terms of the City of London, we need the right regulation for the City of London to continue its massive rate of job creation and wealth creation in our country, but we also need to remain members of the single market because it's absolutely vital for this important sector of our economy. And I hope on that, as on the issue of the national living wage, we can find some agreement between each other.
Mr. Speaker, the question I also put to the Prime Minister, which perhaps he wasn't listening to, was what he was going to do. What I asked was what he's going to do about the UK-administered tax havens, which receive large sums of money from dodgy sources, which should and must be closed down, as should any tax evasion in the City of London. We need a British government that's prepared to chase down this level of corruption.
This government has done more than any previous government to deal with this issue of making sure that our overseas territories and Crown dependencies are not tax havens but behave in a responsible way. And as I said earlier, they're now taking part in the automatic exchange of tax information. That didn't happen before. They've signed up to a common reporting standard for multinational companies. That didn't happen before. And they're getting central registries so we can find out who owns the companies in each territory. Now, I think all of these things are real progress. Of course, we would like them to go further and have public registries of beneficial ownership like we are introducing in this country, not because of anything a Labour government did, but because of a decision by a Conservative Prime Minister. But where I would urge him to be fair on these territories and Crown dependencies is many of them now have gone much further even than many developed countries. Indeed, actually, you get more information now out of some of our Crown dependencies and overseas territories than you would get out of the United States in terms of Delaware. So let's be fair on these for which we have an obligation and a responsibility. We're making them improve their record, and he should acknowledge that.
Mr. Speaker, a month ago, the Prime Minister informed the House that he welcomed the European Union proposals on country-by-country tax transparency reporting. We also agreed with that. Yet, on the 26th of April, Conservative MEPs voted against these proposals. Did they not receive a memo from him, or what? People expect that trade in this country, people expect that people pay their tax in this country. Tomorrow, the European Parliament will be voting again on country-by-country reporting. Can he assure the House that Conservative members of the European Parliament will support these measures, as he told us they would a month ago?
Well, the most important thing is that we support these measures. This government supports these measures. Indeed, these measures have only come forward because it's been a Conservative government here in the United Kingdom proposing them. Now, the only area of disagreement, I would suspect, between himself and myself is I don't think we should set a minimum tax rate for these countries. That's always been a position, actually, of Labour governments and previous Conservative governments, that while we want to make sure all these territories behave properly, we don't actually make them set a minimum tax rate. That's the difference between us. If we want to swap voting records of Labour MEPs and Tory MEPs, let's have a whole session on it, because I've got plenty of material in here.
Mr. Speaker, that was a very long answer when he could have he could have quite simply said, Mr. Speaker, he could have quite simply said whether or not he supports these proposals and if his Conservative MEPs are going to vote for them. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be very well aware of the concern across the whole country about the question of unaccompanied child refugees across Europe. They are in a desperate plight. They're in a very dangerous situation. Everyone's heart reaches out to them. But we have to do more than that, and we have to be practical in our help for them. I got a letter this week from a voluntary worker with child refugees by the name of Hannah. She wrote to me about these children, some of whom have family members in this country. Can the Prime Minister confirm that in respect of response to Lord Dubb's amendment, there will be no delay whatsoever in accepting 3,000 unaccompanied child refugees into this country to give them the support they need and allow them to enjoy the childhood they and all our children deserve?
Well, what I can say to the right honourable gentleman is that we will follow the Dubbs amendment. That is now the law of the land. And of course, the Dubbs amendment says that we have to consult very carefully with local authorities to make sure that as we take these children in, we're able to house them, clothe them, feed them, make sure they're properly looked after. So we need to look at the capacity of our care system, because if you look at some councils, particularly in Kent and southern England, they're already struggling because of the large number of unaccompanied children who've come in. Just two figures for him to put this in context. Last year, 3,000 unaccompanied children arrived and claimed asylum in the UK even before the scheme that's being introduced. Second figure is, of course, under Dublin, children with a connection to the UK can already claim asylum in France or Italy and then come to the UK. We've accepted 30 such transfers since February. But what I can say about Dubbs, there won't be any delay. We'll get on with this as fast as we can. But in order to follow the law, we've got to talk to our local authorities first.
Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It would be helpful if he would confirm that that list will be publicly available and not just accessible for the police. But seeing as the Prime Minister is prepared to lecture other countries on corruption and probity, could he explain why 7 police forces in the UK have launched criminal investigations into Conservative MPs for potential electoral fraud? And Mr. Speaker, it's very serious. So how is it that a Conservative crime and policing commissioner can serve in such a role when being under police investigation?
Well, first of all, let's be clear about this anti-corruption summit. Nobody is lecturing anybody. I think, look, one of the reasons this issue doesn't get addressed is because countries and politicians are too worried about addressing it, knowing that no country is perfect, nor indeed is any politician. But I think it's right for Britain to take this lead, not least because we meet our 0.7% contribution on aid. I think we are entitled to raise this incredibly important issue. As for the issue of what he says about the Electoral Commission, the whole point in this country, the Electoral Commission is independent, and when it comes to operational decisions by a police force, they are independent too. And may that be the case, that's the hallmark of an uncorrupt country. Yeah.
That's all, folks.